Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us here on this platform. It's a pleasure to have you on board with us.
Thank you, Shelby. My pleasure. A pleasure to be here.
Sir, you've had key positions in the corporate industry throughout your professional career. What made you switch to the education sector, and how has your journey been so far?
So the journey has been great, but if you really look at my journey, I left Unilever in the year 1995 to start on my own in training and consulting, and I started teaching simultaneously. So while I was running a corporate training and consulting firm, which you could say is in the corporate sector, I was teaching all the time. So I have had one foot in education and one foot in practice now for 25 years. Right, and when I did my PhD, in 2006 in the US, that time I was in full-time academia for 4 years. When I came back to India again, I was running a consulting firm and dabbling in academia. So I'm still, 50% academic and 50% consultant, executive educator. I don't think that has changed. The thing is that I'm doing it from academia. And the reason I'm doing it from academia was the chance to build a world-class institute out of India. And I have got a chance because I have been on the sidelines teaching at these schools, and I had my own point of view about what was good and bad about the Indian school. And some very, very senior people, including Mr. Deepak Parekh and Shrikant Tatar, interviewed me for my current job, and they said, "You seem to have some ideas about how Indian academia should move. Instead of complaining about it, why don't you come and do it?" And that seemed like a good promise to pick up.
So, in your opinion, what is the future of management education in India? Is the demand as strong as it was few years ago, or it is waning?
I don't think the demand for management education will wane. I think the nature and shape of that demand will change. So if you look at the history of management education, largely we were built around the 2-year MBA, right? And the 2-year MBA is a degree where you educate people at one point in time, and it is really you're teaching them for the next 25 years because you are not only covering the functional subjects, you're also covering strategy, you're covering leadership, and some of these people will move into strategic roles 10 years later or 15 years later. So it's a degree for a lifetime. I think the 2-year MBA will continue to have its place as companies look for entry-level talent and fresh management trainees. But I think the larger direction for management education to move is that lifelong learning. If you look today, more and more people, the average lifespan of an employee in a company has gone down. More and more people will need to continually reinvest to stay relevant. So if you look at historically, you would do an MBA or you would do a basic undergraduation degree, and then you would do some advanced course 25 years down the line. I think today you will get a market where people will invest, just as they're investing in food, just as they're spending on food every year, right? They're spending on clothing every year. But where is your annual budget for education? So you will slowly find that working executives have an annual budget for education. So the nature and shape of the offering of management education will change. More and more hybrid models will come in, but people will need to reinvest continually in their own education. That's number one. Number two, management education has been designed largely for the large corporates and the employees of the large corporates. Today, the social sector needs management. Today, political parties needs management. So the universality of management education means that you will open up management education to more and more sectors. So the idea is management is just the art and science of getting things done through people and resources. If you look at that, schools need better management. Political parties definitely need better management. The social sector needs better management. Government needs better management. So we will find a broader definition of the scope and scale of management education. So lifelong learning and hybrid models, that's how I see it moving and coming together.
So having completed your education in India as well as internationally, how, according to you, can Indian business schools reinvent management education? in a way that India is brought to the forefront of management training globally? And how is SPJMR contributing towards this aspect?
SPGMR itself is an interesting model. I think the first part is largely for too long in India, being world class has meant we have to be imitative. Being world class has meant we have to be like Stanford or like MIT. And I think the problem with that is if you are trying to catch up with somebody else, you will never catch up, right? Because they are a moving target. So we have to be world class in our own way. And I think at SPGMR, what we are really saying is twofold. One is we are saying the West is good at efficiency. The West is good at case study methods, simulations. These are things that the West has pioneered and we can learn from, innovate. But what the East has been good at traditionally is attitudinal education, value-based education, self-awareness. So if you look at Eastern wisdom, Eastern ethos, then that is an opportunity where the knowledge and skill dimension is something that we can rely on some of the Western models for. But the attitudinal dimension, what we call knowing, doing, being, the being dimension, is something that we can draw from our own heritage and from our own strength. So that is one. The second is this ability to design innovative experiential learning within the curriculum itself. And as a small example, two examples at SPJMR. All of our students, before they go for their corporate internships, they do a 1 month plus internship in the social sector. And what they are learning is that, and one, they get to see a village, they get to see rural India, and they are learning to apply management in constrained environments where the problems are not well defined. And today, if you look at the world, even the COVID world, today the problems that we are facing are far more ambiguous and far more interconnected. So we need to train students for this. This is something we are doing. The second is, how do you teach young kids empathy? So we have a program called Abhyudaya where our students mentor a child from the nearby underprivileged areas. And we have had stories of students coming in and complaining about the size of their hostel room. And when they do this mentoring, they find that there are 5 people living in a space that is smaller than their hostel room. And those 5 people are happy. So what it teaches them about empathy, about seeing the world through the eyes of the other. And while we say that we are mentoring the children, our students learn as much from those kids as the other way around. So, and many of our students stay in touch way beyond the curriculum. It shows you that it does touch them in fairly deep ways.
So SPJMR is among the top 20 management colleges in India. What is it that SPJMR does differently from other premier management institutes of the country?
So I think it depends on which rankings you're following. But if you look at international rankings and national rankings, I would make that top 5 or top 6. So within top 20 is within top 5 or top 6. But, so that's, I think, a fairer indication. If you look at US Global, which ranks global institutes, we are in the top 200 in the world and the top 5 in India. And this has been the case for the last 3 years. So what is different? I spoke to you about some of the value-based learning pieces. I spoke to you about pedagogy. I think there are 2 or 3 more things that we'll talk about. One to me is the faculty profile. If you look at most institutes, they will recruit only PhDs at entry. SPJMR has had for a very long time said that if you are a corporate executive who's been a senior manager with 20 years of work experience, and now you want to do something different, you want to give back, you want to learn, you want to read, you want to come into academics, we will take you in at the middle level and say, get a PhD in the next 5 years. So we do not insist on a PhD, which means that if I look at my faculty profile today, 70% plus of my faculty have more than 10 years of work experience. And what this implies is that what is taught in our classrooms is very practical and very current. And this is something we pride ourselves on. Second, as an institute, we were not that strong on research. We have strengthened research a lot in the last 5 years. But we are very clear that the number one differentiator is teaching excellence. So we will not, as an institute, recruit a strong researcher who is not a good teacher. We will want to have the strong researcher, but you must value teaching because we believe the number one product is the student. And culturally, our faculty will spend time with students beyond the classroom. because that does a lot to shape values. I'll give you an example of the pandemic. Right now, we've had a new batch joining online, right? So, as many as 28 of my faculty have signed up to do Zoom calls with students in groups of 6 beyond classroom hours. And this is a Know Your Faculty initiative, and it's very popular with the students because the idea is that when you want to teach people values, how do you teach people values? If you have people in your institutions who care deeply for them, who embody the values, and who demonstrate trust. See, to be a good leader, you need to trust others and care for others, and you need to balance competition and cooperation. Unless we demonstrate that in the way our faculty behave with our students, it will not get internalized. This is a large part of it.
So having an elaborate experience in the corporate industry, what according to you are the new skills in demand for better chances of employability?
So I think one of the things that we are definitely talking about is this thing called digital readiness, which basically says that there was a point in time at which technology was a business function. Today, technology is something that is infused into everything. So it's no longer just about doing a course in digital marketing, but when you teach consumer behavior is digital embedded. When you teach finance, are you talking about how information technology is changing the way account statements are written? So I think that comfort with technology, that willingness to adapt, and the ability to link technology to business decisions, that's why I would put as number one. I would say an awareness of issues related to sustainability is becoming far more important. I think corporates themselves, social sensitivity, sustainability, are more important. The ability to solve unstructured problems and see larger connections. Because the situation we are in today started off as a health crisis, right? But today it is a health crisis, an economic crisis, a financial crisis, and a social crisis. So all these 4 ecosystems are linked. Are your students able to see the linkages? So this ability to be analytical and at the same time to connect the dots, what they call T-shaped, where you have depth in a subject, but you're able to see the linkages. So all of these, and finally, probably the most important thing, it's 50% of what you're taught in the business school will be outdated within 5 years. So the ability to learn, learnability, the ability to question, the ability to reflect, the ability to understand your own assumptions and see which of those assumptions are still relevant. All of these will become increasingly useful.
So do you see any trend in MBA graduates opting for entrepreneurship? And what are the driving forces behind it? How does SPJIMR prepare its students for such career choices?
So we do see a trend, but the trend is interesting in the following sense that many MBA graduates, when they do the MBAs, have loans. And that is why there is, at the beginning of the first year, I might have 50 out of 240 in my 2-year program, and maybe around in other programs also we would have a number wanting to look at entrepreneurship, but many of them opt for jobs. But we find that 3 to 5 years down the line, many of them opt, because by that time the loan is paid off, they've built reserves. So you have to leave it to people when they take that plunge. But why will MBA? So what do we do in the institute? We have something called a deferred placement policy. So if you want to do a startup when you graduate, we will let you do that startup for 2 years and we will pay you a stipend for it. And at the end of 2 years, if it does not work out, you can opt for placement. So we are giving you a little bit of a cushion to kind of manage that. But I think the larger thing is we are creating a larger incubation, and we are extending incubation not just to our graduating students, but to our alumni. Because we find that 3 to 10 years post leaving the institute is when the entrepreneurial bug hits you. Also, many times, you should not do entrepreneurship because it is suddenly the glamorous thing to do and there is a lot of money. You must immerse in a domain well enough to have a clear idea and an opportunity that you've identified. And that is probably the right time. So we see a lot more alumni ventures coming along. We do see some startups from fresh graduates, but we see a lot of alumni ventures kind of coming along. That's the direction.
So, kindly enlighten our viewers on how SPJMR creates a cohesive environment among students and faculties coming from different backgrounds and cities.
I think this one starts with admission. Because if you look at our admission process, there are two rounds of admission. Both are group interviews. The first round is what we call it's a depth interview where we're looking at why you want to choose your specialization. Do you know your core undergraduate content well? Do you know your work experience well? The second round is what we call a value interview. And in the value interview, so when we do admissions, I think at least 60-70% of our faculty are involved in the interviewing process. So if you're looking at the number of man-days, for 240 seats, I think we would be interviewing over 2,000 candidates. So the number of faculty man-days we give to this interviewing process, because the bond between faculty and student is built at this time. Then again, when we do the experiential learning activities, we have something called ADMAP, the Assessment and Development of Managerial and Administrative Potential, where student committees, and it's part of a course, students are being taught how to get things done and to influence without power. Student committees are responsible for handling various aspects of institute functioning. And they do not have any formal position, but they are mentored by an assigned faculty member. All of these are creating opportunities for faculties and students to interact outside the classroom. Because I think if you look back at your education, even if you look back at your education, you will see that sometimes you have asked a question outside the class. And this question has resulted in a 2-hour conversation with a faculty member. And that conversation may have stayed with you beyond any classroom. So I think that is the thing, that how do you create that thing where faculty are approachable and accessible to students beyond the classroom. So this is one. We have something called the Personal Growth Lab, which all programs go through, where students go off to Khandala, where they are doing various physical outbound activities in teams. And there is also an element of psychometric testing. And at the end of those 4 days, you find that a batch of 120, as in a 1-year program, or 240, So when you look at these batch sizes, you find that from 240 people where maybe 20 knew each other beforehand, suddenly at the end of this exercise, 80 to 90 know each other very well. So we are creating these mechanisms. We also do all our projects through academic groups. And you will find that by the end of 1 year, the academic group itself has become very, very close. So, so there are a lot of mechanisms built in. As an institute, we try to be less competitive internally because we are trying to find this balance between competition and collaboration. Because we really find that collaboration is a more important skill. The ability to get things done in teams is a more important skill. And finding that balance between the individual and the group, between competition and contribution, is something that we are aspiring to do.
So what do you think should be the Institute's top priority over the next 10 years?
Our mission statement is to influence practice and promote value-based growth. So there are 3 dimensions to this. One is we need to create the right set of values in our students by demonstrating those values in the way we run the institute and interact with our students. That remains priority number 1. Second is we need to send out students who are current in terms of practice, which means what is taught in our classroom needs to be very well taught, teaching excellence. But currency, and currency is 2 parts. One is currency in the latest research, but currency in the latest practice. So our faculty need to have a very strong industry connect. They need to consult. So the second element would be this. The third element is that if you look at influencing practice, Indian business schools have been around now for 72 years. XLRI was 1948, I think. But if you look at thought leaders, global thought leaders, you'll find a lot of Indians who are global thought leaders based in the US. There aren't too many names if you look at thought leaders based out of India from the Indian B school system. So we will try to create more of our faculty as thought leaders who will influence the way corporate India thinks and tomorrow the world thinks. So thought leadership out of India for the world, I think, would be the third element, which is really how do we influence managerial practice positively? How do we make companies more value-based? How do we make sustainability a real agenda for corporates as opposed to something that sometimes people pay lip service to? So that's.
So, any suggestions you would like to give to the current youth and the aspiring students?
I would just say that look, have the courage to ask yourself who you are and what is it you enjoy doing. And even if you don't know, keep asking yourself that question. The less you follow the herd, the more likely you are to find your own path of success, number one. And number two, success is not a destination. Success is not a position. Success is not a compensation package. Success is an ongoing journey towards excellence in things you're passionate about.
That was an insightful message, sir. Thank you so much for your time here.
Thank you, Shalvi. Enjoyed the conversation.